Hello, my dear adventurers. If you like the story, please subscribe. Welcome back to another evening of shared tales and wonders. Tonight, we journey to Middle-earth, that ancient realm of heroes and shadow, of elves and dragons, of great deeds and terrible darkness. But our story does not begin with the shining halls of the elves, nor with the forges of the dwarves. No, tonight we delve into stone and shadow, into the deep places of the world where sunlight never reaches. Tonight we tell the tale of the trolls. You might think you know their story. You might remember the 3 foolish trolls who argued over how to cook a company of dwarves, or the great cave troll in the darkness of Moria. But every creature has a beginning, every monster a genesis, and the trolls of Middle-earth, for all their cruelty and their simplicity, have a tale worth telling. A tale of creation and corruption, of loyalty and loneliness, of an ending written in stone. So, dear adventurers, settle into your blankets, let the fire warm your face, and listen. Listen to the drums that beat in mountain depths, to the grinding of stone on stone, to the heavy footfalls of creatures older than many kingdoms. Let us begin at the beginning, in the time before the sun and moon, when only starlight graced the world. Deep beneath the mountains of the north, in the bowels of the earth, where magma still remembered the world's first forging, something stirred. Not life as the elves knew it, singing beneath stars. Not life as the dwarves would claim it, shaped by the hand of All the Smith. This was something else, something twisted, something dark. In the fortress of Angband, that terrible pit of iron and fire, Morgoth the enemy worked at his black crafts. He had failed to make life of his own, for that power belonged to Eru alone. But what he could not create, he could corrupt, and corrupt he did. In the deepest furnaces of his realm, where his chief lieutenant, the Balrog Lord, tended fires that would burn until the breaking of the world, Morgoth gathered his materials: stone, earth, iron, and something else. Something taken from the wills of giants long dead, from the bones of mountains, from the very foundations of the world. He spoke words that should never be spoken, words that twisted the natural order, words that bent creation to his malice. And from the stone things opened their eyes. They were not born as children are born. They did not wake as sleepers wake. They simply were not, and then they were. The first trolls knew confusion before they knew anything else. Awareness came slowly, like water seeping through cracks in stone. They felt the weight of rock around them, the heat of deep fires below, the cold dark above. One of these first beings, if such a creature could be said to have a name, might have been called Grond, for he was vast and terrible and strong beyond measure. His skin was grey as granite and rough as cliff face. His eyes, small and red as dying coals, opened for the first time in darkness. He tried to understand what he was, but the thoughts came slowly, grinding against each other like stones in a river. Cold, that was the first thing. Cold stone against his back. Heavy, that was the second. His limbs felt like they were carved from the mountain itself. Hungry, that was the third, and it filled him with a pain he had no words for. Grond sat up. The movement was awkward, unfamiliar. his hands massive things with fingers thick as branches pressed against the stone floor. Around him, others were stirring. In the dim red glow of distant fires he saw them, beings like himself, some larger, some smaller, all hewn from the same terrible purpose. Another sat up nearby. This one had shoulders like boulders and arms that hung nearly to the ground. His face was broad and brutal, with a nose that seemed to have been broken and reformed from solid rock. He looked at Grand with those small red eyes, and Grand looked back. Neither knew what to say. Neither truly knew how to speak, but both felt the same gnawing emptiness inside. A sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps, but not the heavy tread of troll kind. These were lighter, quicker, and they clicked on stone like claws. From the shadows emerged creatures shorter than the trolls, but no less terrible. Orcs. They carried torches and whips, and they barked commands in a language the trolls did not yet understand, but somehow knew to obey. The meaning was clear enough. Rise, follow, obey. The trolls stood. It was not easy. Their bodies were still learning what limbs were for, what balance meant. But fear is a powerful teacher, and the orcs' whips cracked with sharp authority. The trolls lurched forward, following the flickering torchlight through tunnels of black stone. They walked for what might have been hours. Time meant nothing in that place where no sun rose or set. The tunnels stretched endlessly, carved from living rock by the labor of countless slaves. Other prisoners passed them in the dark, elves their lights dimmed by captivity, men their backs bent from labor. All averted their eyes from the trolls. Even in these depths, even among the enslaved, the trolls were recognized for what they were, creatures of the enemy. Finally they emerged into a vast chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadow above, but far below a lake of fire cast a hellish light on everything. At the far end of the chamber, on a throne of iron and hate, sat Morgoth. Even the trolls, new to the world and simple in their thoughts, knew terror when they saw him. He was tall beyond measure, crowned with iron that burned with cold fire. His eyes were like pits that swallowed light. When he spoke, the stones themselves seemed to groan. "Look upon my children," Morgoth said, and his voice was like the grinding of glaciers. "Behold, the stone-born, the mountain-kin, created to endure, to crush, to destroy all that is fair and good in this world." The trolls did not understand all his words, but they understood the hatred in them. They understood that they were made for war, made to break things, made to serve. "You are strong," Morgoth continued, rising from his throne. Even across that vast space, his presence pressed down on them like a physical weight. Stronger than elves, stronger than men. No blade forged by elf or dwarf can easily pierce your hide. You are my hammers, my breakers of gates, my crushers of shields. He descended the steps of his throne, his footfalls like thunder. The orcs fell back, but they drove the trolls forward with their whips. Grand found himself at the front, facing that terrible lord. "But you have one weakness," Morgoth said, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face, though it held no warmth, only malice. "The light of the sun. Should its rays touch your skin, you shall turn to stone, eternal, frozen, forever aware but unable to move, to speak, to live." He leaned down and his face filled Gron's vision. "This is my gift to you. Serve me in darkness and you shall have life. Serve me well and you shall have meat and prey, but betray me or fail me or dare to walk in the light of day and you shall know a fate worse than death." Gron could not speak, could not move, could only stare into those terrible eyes. Then Morgoth straightened, and the moment passed. "Take them to the training pits," he commanded the orcs. "Teach them to fight, teach them to obey, and bring them meat. They hunger." The trolls were driven from the throne room, but Gron looked back once. In that moment, he understood what he was. Not a living thing, not truly. A weapon, a tool, a thing made to serve the darkness, and deep in what passed for his heart, something that might have been sorrow took root, though he had no name for it yet. The training pits were carved from the mountain's heart, great circular arenas where the floor was stained dark with blood, both black and red. Here the orcs brought the trolls to learn their purpose. But trolls were not like orcs. They could not be trained with words and discipline. They were too simple, too new. Instead, they were taught through hunger and instinct. The orcs herded a group of prisoners into the pit, men and elves gaunt from imprisonment. The trolls looked down at them from the arena's edge. The hunger that had gnawed at them since they first opened their eyes suddenly sharpened into focus. "Kill!" an orc commander barked. "Feed!" The trolls descended into the pit. What happened next was neither noble nor glorious. It was brutal and swift. The prisoners tried to run, tried to fight with bare hands in desperation, but trolls were made for crushing. Gron's massive hands closed around an elf warrior who had once stood proud beneath stars. One squeeze and it was over. The feeding frenzy was terrible. The trolls learned what their teeth were for, what their strength could do. And with each mouthful, the gnawing hunger eased. But it never entirely went away. It would always be there, that emptiness, driving them to seek prey, to hunt, to kill. Over the following days and weeks, or perhaps it was months, for time flowed strangely in Angban's depths, the trolls learned. They learned to fight as a group. They learned to respond to the orcs' commands, simple though their understanding remained. They learned which caves led to the feeding pens and which paths led to punishment, and they learned about others of their kind. For Morgoth had not created just one group of trolls. There were many. Some were kept in the deep places, growing huge and terrible in the darkness. These would become the mountain trolls, the cave dwellers, creatures of pure strength and savagery. Others were kept near the surface where weak starlight filtered through cracks in the earth. These grew smaller, quicker, but no less dangerous. Grond met another of the firstborn one evening, if evening meant anything in that lightless realm. This troll was called Bog, and he was, if possible, even larger than Grond. His skin was darker, almost black in the torchlight, and when he moved, small stones fell from his shoulders like rain. "Pain," Bog said. It was the first word Grond had heard another troll speak clearly. "Yes," Grond replied, because he understood. The constant gnawing pain of existence, of being something that should not be. "Why?" Bog asked, a simple question that had no simple answer. Grond looked up at the distant ceiling where he knew, beyond countless tons of stone, the stars still shone in a world he would never safely see. Dark Lord make, we serve." "Yes," Bog agreed, but there was something in his tone, something that might have been resignation or might have been the beginning of understanding. "We serve," and so they did. For weeks that stretched into months, the trolls trained and fought and fed. They became weapons just as Morgoth intended. And when at last they were ready, when they had been shaped by hunger and violence into the tools the Dark Lord required, they were led forth from the training pits. They marched through the great gates of Angband into tunnels that led toward the surface. But they marched at night, when the sky was safely dark. For the first time since their creation, the trolls saw the world outside the mountain. It was vast, terrifying, beautiful in its way, though they had no word for beauty. The stars blazed overhead like tiny cold fires. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touching the sky. And the air, oh, the air was not the dead, stale breath of deep places. It moved. It carried scents, pine and snow, and something else they could not name. Freedom? No. The trolls would never be free. But this was at least space, room to move, a world to crush beneath their feet. The orc commander who led them, a twisted creature named Griswold, pointed toward a distant valley. "There," he snarled. "Elf settlement, you break it. Smash stones, kill everything. Bring back heads for the master." The trolls looked at each other. Gron felt something stir in his chest. Not excitement, not joy, but purpose. This was what they were made for. This was their reason for being. They descended the mountain as the stars wheeled overhead. Behind them, the great darkness of Angband yawned like a hungry mouth. Before them war awaited, and in that moment, as Gron took his first true steps in the world above, he knew one simple truth. He would never see the sun. But oh, how he longed to know what it looked like. The trolls marched on through the night, and Middle-earth would never be the same. The wars of the First Age were terrible beyond imagining, dear adventurers. The clash of armies that shook mountains, the fires that burned forests to ash, the screams of the dying that echoed across valleys. And in those wars the trolls found their purpose for better or worse. Grond stood in the mustering fields outside Angband as dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Around him, thousands upon thousands of orcs formed ragged lines, their black armor gleaming in the light of great fire pits. Wargs prowled between the ranks, their handlers barely keeping them under control. And among them all, like great stones in a dark river, stood the trolls. There were hundreds now. Morgoth had been busy in his deep forges, creating more and more of the Stoneborn. Some were like Grond, massive and grey. Others were even larger, bred for breaking castle gates and crushing cavalry. A few were smaller, quicker, with longer arms for climbing walls. All shared the same fate, cursed to serve in darkness, forever barred from the light of day. "The battle of sudden flame approaches," an orc captain announced, his voice carrying across the assembled host. "The enemy sends us forth to break the elves and their mortal allies. You trolls will march with the 4th Battalion. Your task is simple. Break their lines, scatter their horses, crush their shields. Do this and you feast. Fail and you starve. Simple instructions for simple minds." The trolls understood. Break things. That was what they did best. The march began as the last stars faded from the sky. The trolls moved in a tight group, surrounded by orcs who drove them forward with whips and curses. They traveled through valleys where no light penetrated, through tunnels that Morgoth slaves had carved beneath enemy territory, emerging only when night fell again. On the third night of their march, they encountered something that made even the trolls pause. A figure wreathed in flame, tall as a house with wings of shadow and fire. A Balrog, one of Morgoth's most terrible servants, a creature of ancient evil from before the world was made. The Balrog regarded the trolls with eyes like burning coals. When it spoke, the air itself seemed to burn. "Stonekin," it rumbled, and the trolls felt the words in their bones. "Follow, fight, die if you must, but serve the master." Grond had thought nothing could frighten him after his creation, after the training pits, after all he had seen in Angban's depths. He was wrong. The Balrog was fear made flesh, power incarnate. Even Morgoth himself seemed distant compared to this being of fire and shadow. But the Balrog moved on, leading other battalions toward different battles. The trolls continued their march, each lost in what passed for thought in their simple minds. Bog walked beside Grond, his great feet leaving deep prints in the soft earth. "We die?" he asked simply. "Maybe," Grond replied. He had learned more words now, enough to express basic ideas. "All things die, maybe not trolls. We are stone." "Stone breaks," Bog observed, and it was perhaps the most philosophical thing Grond had ever heard another troll say. They reached the battlefield on the fourth night. The valley before them was already scarred by war. Great sections of forest had been burned. The earth was churned to mud. And in the distance beyond a river that ran red with blood, they could see the elf fortifications, tall walls of white stone, towers that gleamed even in starlight, banners that bore the symbols of the high kings of the Noldor, beautiful even to troll eyes, which meant they would enjoy destroying it even more. The orc commander gathered the trolls. "You see those walls? You break them. You see those towers? You pull them down. The elves think their stonework will protect them. Show them what real stone can do." The battle began with fire. Catapults hurled burning pitch over the walls. Siege engines that Morgoth smiths had built in imitation of the dwarven craft pounded the gates. But the elves responded with arrows that flew like silver rain, and with songs that strengthened their defenses, magic woven into every stone. "Now," the commander screamed, "trolls forward!" They charged, not with the wild abandon of orcs, but with the unstoppable force of an avalanche. Arrows bounced off their thick hides or stuck but did not slow them. Elf warriors tried to form a shield wall before the gates, but what use were shields against creatures who could lift horses? Grond reached the gates first. They were old wood, banded with iron and carved with runes of protection. He could feel the magic in them, a warmth that made his stone-like skin itch. But he was stronger than their magic. He was made to break things. His fists hammered against the wood, once, twice, 3 times. On the fourth blow, the timbers cracked. On the fifth, they splintered. On the sixth, the gates exploded inward, and the trolls poured through. What followed was chaos. The elves fought with desperate courage, their swords flashing like starlight, but courage alone could not stand against troll strength. Grond caught an elf warrior, armor and all, and threw him against a wall with such force that both warrior and stone shattered. Yet the elves were not helpless. Their blades, forged in ancient times and blessed with songs of power, could pierce even troll hide if they struck true. Gron felt pain lance through his shoulder as an elf blade found a gap in his rocky skin. He roared, a sound like grinding stones, and swung his massive arm. The elf warrior tried to dodge, but was too slow. The blow sent him flying into the darkness. Around Grond, other trolls fought and fell. A younger troll, barely 2 years old in the count of his kind, took an elf arrow through the eye and went down like a felled tree. Another was surrounded by a dozen elf warriors who hacked at his legs until he could no longer stand, then finished him while he lay helpless on the ground. But for every troll that fell, 10 elves died. The walls were breached, the towers burned, and as dawn threatened on the horizon, the surviving trolls retreated, dragging their wounded with them, leaving the fortress a smoking ruin. Bog had survived, though he had lost 2 fingers from his left hand. He looked at the stumps with something like curiosity. "Hurt," he observed. "Yes," Grond agreed. His shoulders still bled, thick blood the color of mud. "But we live." "We live," Bog echoed. Then after a pause, "Why?" It was a question Gron could not answer. Why did they live? Why did they fight? Why did they serve? They had been made for this, but did that mean it was right? Did that mean it was what they wanted? But trolls did not get to want. They only got to obey. The years passed. Wars came and went like seasons, each one more terrible than the last. The trolls became veterans, if such a word could apply to creatures who barely understood what they were fighting for. They learned the art of siege warfare. They learned to work together, forming great shield walls with their own bodies, advancing under arrow fire to reach enemy walls. They learned which battles to fight with fury and which to approach with patience. And they learned loss. So many of their kind fell, crushed by falling towers, burned by dragon fire, for yes, Morgoth had dragons too, and sometimes, in the chaos of battle, they made no distinction between friend and foe. Caught by the sunrise, frozen in stone in unfortunate places where the night had not lasted long enough for their retreat, Grond and Bog survived, somehow. Perhaps they were stronger, perhaps they were luckier, or perhaps they were simply more cautious than their kin, having learned that war was not just about strength, but about knowing when to advance and when to fall back into shadow. They were in the siege camp outside Gondolin, that hidden city of the elves, when they first heard the rumors. Whispered words passed between orcs when they thought the trolls could not hear. Morgoth was losing. The free peoples had allied against him. Great heroes had arisen, Fingolfin, Fëanor, Beren, Hurin, names that even orcs spoke with grudging respect and fear. "What if Master loses?" Bog asked one night, as they sat in their assigned pit far from the campfires. Grond had wanted the same thing. Then we are free. Are we? Bog rumbled. Can Stonekin be free? We are made for him. Without him, what are we? Alive, Grond said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. We are alive. That is something. But Bog shook his massive head. Are we? Or are we just moving stones, living rocks? We do not grow. We do not change. We only break things and eat and serve. Is that life? Before Gron could answer, an orc commander came running through the camp, screaming orders. Assault! Now! The elves know we are here. They are coming. Trolls to the front. Protect the siege engines. The battle was brief and brutal. The elves of Gondolin, led by their lords in bright armor, fell upon the siege camp like divine wrath. They had the advantage of surprise and the fury of those defending their homes. The orcs broke and ran. The siege engines burned. And the trolls, caught between their orders and their instincts, found themselves surrounded. Grond fought until his arms were leaden with exhaustion. He saw Bog go down under a dozen elf blades, saw his old companion, the first troll he had ever truly spoken with, fall to his knees. Their eyes met. Across the battlefield, Bog's expression was not one of pain or fear. It was almost peaceful, as if at last he had found an answer to his question. Then an elf sword took his head and Bog was gone. Grond roared his grief and rage. He killed every elf he could reach, but there were always more. Finally, an orc grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the retreat. Come, Stonekin, the master calls us back. We cannot win this day. They fled into the tunnels as the sun rose behind them, turning the entrance to golden death for any who might try to follow. Grond collapsed in the darkness, his body shaking with something he did not understand. Later, he would learn the word for it. Mourning. The years ground on. Morgoth's power waned as the elves and their allies pressed him ever harder. The great siege of Angband began, and the trolls found themselves defending rather than attacking. They manned the walls and towers. They fought in the great tunnels. They did everything their simple minds could conceive to hold back the tide. But it was not enough. Nothing was enough. The great battle came at last, and with it, the end of an age. Grond stood on the walls of Angband as the host of Valinor appeared on the horizon. They shone like stars brought to earth. Their banners were too bright to look upon, and at their head came beings of power so immense that even Morgoth's fortress trembled at their approach. This is the end, an orc near Grond muttered. The Valar themselves have come. We are all doomed. The orc was right. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was destruction. It was the ending of all that Morgoth had built. His dragons fell from the sky. His balrogs were driven into the depths or cast into the void. His orcs were slaughtered by the thousands. And his trolls, they fought, because they knew no other way to be. They fought until the walls fell. They fought until Angband itself was torn down. They fought until Morgoth himself was captured and cast into the void beyond the world. In the chaos of that final battle, as fire and light and fury consumed everything, Grond found himself running, not toward the enemy, not toward death, but away into the deep tunnels, through cracks in the earth that led east and south, away from the light of the Valar, away from the ending of his world. Other trolls ran with him. Some he knew, most he did not. They fled like rats from a burning ship deep into the bones of the earth, into the wild places where darkness still held some domain. They ran until they could run no more. And then they collapsed in a deep cave, far from Angband, far from the battle, far from everything they had ever known. "Master is gone," one of them said into the silence. "Yes," Gron replied. "What do we do?" Gron looked around at the surviving trolls. Perhaps 100 had made it this far. Perhaps 100 out of thousands. They were masterless now, purposeless, free in a way they had never asked to be. "We survive," Gron said at last. "We find dark places. We hide from the sun. We hunt. We eat. We live." "Why?" another troll asked, and Gron heard Bog's voice in that question. "Because," Gron said slowly, working out the thought even as he spoke it, "because we are here. We exist. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is all we need." The trolls sat in silence, digesting this idea. In the darkness of that cave, far from their creator, far from the world that had shaped them, they became something new. Not servants, not weapons. Just creatures trying to understand what it meant to be alive. The first age had ended. The second age was beginning, and the trolls, against all odds, would endure. The world changed when Morgoth fell, dear adventurers. The very shape of Middle-earth was altered. Mountains rose and fell. Seas rushed in to claim ancient lands. And in this new world, the trolls found themselves scattered like seeds on the wind, each group seeking their own dark corner in which to survive. Grond led his small band east through the misty mountains that had thrust upward during the world's breaking. They traveled only by night, hiding in caves during the day, always fearful of the sun that could turn them to stone in moments. It was a hard existence, but it was existence. That was more than many of their kind could claim. One night, as they crossed a high mountain pass, Grond paused to look back west. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the ruins of Angband. Somewhere even further lay the sea that had swallowed so much of the old world. He felt no nostalgia for those places. How could he? They held only pain and servitude. But still, they had been home, in a way. The only home he had ever known. "Thinking?" asked Throck, a younger troll who had begun following Grond's lead. Throck was smaller than most trolls, barely 10 feet tall, with skin that was more brown than gray. He had survived the wars by being quick rather than strong, a useful trait in the new world. "Remembering," Gron corrected, "is different." "Old world gone," Throck said with simple certainty. "New world here. We adapt or we die." Adapt. It was a concept that trolls, created for a single purpose, had never needed to consider. But Throck was right. The world had changed. They would need to change with it, or they would vanish like morning mist. The band split up over the following months. Some trolls preferred the deep caves, the places where darkness was complete and eternal. They burrowed into the mountains, creating lairs in the deepest places, emerging only rarely to hunt. These became the cave trolls, the monsters of the depths, growing larger and more savage in their isolation. Others, like Throck, preferred the hills and forests. They were smaller, more adaptable, willing to risk living closer to the surface where prey was more plentiful, but danger was greater. These became the hill trolls, the forest dwellers, creatures of shadow and stealth, and a very few, went north, to the frozen lands where winter reigned eternal, where the sun barely rose even in summer, and where a troll might walk in twilight without fear. These became the snow trolls, pale as ice, fierce as winter storms. Grond himself settled in the misty mountains, in a cave system that connected to vast underground rivers. It was not comfortable, but it was safe, deep enough that no ray of sunlight could penetrate, but close enough to the surface that he could emerge at night to hunt the sheep and goats that grazed on the mountain slopes. He was alone now, by choice. He had grown tired of others, tired of questions he could not answer, tired of trying to explain to younger trolls what the old world had been like. Sometimes solitude was its own kind of peace. Years passed, then decades. Grond lost count. Time moved differently when you lived in darkness, when every night was like every other night. He hunted, he ate, he slept on beds of stone. He existed. Sometimes he encountered other creatures, orcs, scattered remnants of Morgoth's armies, trying to rebuild their strength. They gave him a wide berth, recognizing him as one of the old ones, a survivor of the great wars. Once he met a dwarf prospecting for metals in a shallow cave. They stared at each other for a long moment, troll and dwarf, ancient enemies. Then the dwarf wisely retreated and Gron let him go. He had no master to order him to kill, no reason to fight except hunger, and he was not hungry that night. Another time, he glimpsed elves in a valley far below his cave. They were singing, their voices carrying up the mountainside in the still night air. Grond listened from his high perch hidden in shadow. Their songs spoke of things he could not understand. Beauty, joy, hope, the light of the two trees that had shone before the sun and moon. Their world and his were so different. He might as well have been listening to bird song. Yet something in their music touched him. Some chord that resonated in whatever passed for a soul in a troll's stony heart. When the singing faded and the elves moved on, Grond found himself feeling an emotion he had no name for. Later, he would learn it was called loneliness. So. In the forests of Trollshaws, far to the west of Grond's mountain, other trolls were learning their own lessons about the new world. A group of 3 had settled there, in a region that would eventually bear their kind's name. They were younger than Grond, born in the final years of Morgoth's reign, and they had adapted better to life without a master. The largest of the 3 was called Tom. He had a broad face and small eyes, and he was the closest thing the trio had to a leader. His companion Bert was slightly smaller but quicker-witted, with a nose that had been broken in some long-ago battle and had healed crooked. The third, William, was the youngest and complained constantly about everything. "I'm hungry," William announced one evening as they lurked in the shadows of an old oak tree. "We haven't eaten in 3 days." "It's been 2 days," Bert corrected. "And whose fault is that?" "You're the one who let the last sheep get away." It was fast, William protested. It was a sheep, Tom rumbled. Sheep are not fast. You are just slow. Well, maybe if someone helped instead of just watching. Quiet, Tom interrupted. I hear something. They all fell silent, which for trolls was never truly silent. Their breathing was like wind through caves, their heartbeats like distant drums. But they listened, and yes, there were sounds in the forest. Footsteps, voices, the jingle of bells on a pack animal. Travelers, Bert said, his eyes gleaming. We could have a proper meal tonight. Maybe they have more than sheep, William added hopefully. Maybe they have bread or cheese. I miss cheese. You've never had cheese, Tom pointed out. Well, I miss the idea of it then. They waited until the travelers were closer. There were 5 of them. Men by the look of them traveling with 2 horses laden with goods. Merchants, perhaps, or traders. Easy prey for trolls who knew the forest. Tom stepped out onto the path. The effect was immediate. The horses screamed and bolted. The men drew weapons, but their hands trembled. Tom was 15 feet tall and could tear a man in half. They knew it. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Easy now, Tom said, spreading his massive hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. He had been practicing talking to humans. It made things easier if they were too frightened to run. We just want food. No need for violence. Monster, one of the men shouted, though his voice cracked. Well, yes, Tom admitted. But I'm a reasonable monster. You give us food, you walk away. Simple. And if we refuse, the lead man asked, trying to sound brave. Bert stepped out from behind a tree on the other side of the path. Then we eat you instead of the food, still simple. William emerged from the undergrowth, completing the encirclement. Please have cheese, he added hopefully. The men looked at each other. Then wisely, they began unpacking their horses. Soon the trolls had a feast laid out before them. Salted pork, dried fish, hard bread, and yes, a wheel of cheese that made William almost weep with joy. You can go, Tom told the men when they had taken what they wanted. Tell others, if you travel through troll shores at night, bring extra food. We take food, you keep lives, fair trade. The men fled. The trolls ate, and a pattern was established that would repeat itself many times over the years. The 3 trolls of Troll Shores were not kind, exactly, but they were practical. Dead travelers brought armies. Live travelers who spread the word about a toll brought more travelers who came prepared. This is good, Bert said around a mouthful of pork. We found a system. It's extortion, William said cheerfully. I like it. Tom said nothing, but he was thinking. They had adapted. They had found a way to survive that did not require constant war or serving a dark master. Was this freedom? Was this what life was supposed to be? He did not know, but it was better than the alternative. Far to the north, beyond even the grey mountains, the snow trolls had found their own peace. In lands of eternal winter, they walked in the dim twilight of polar summer and the deep darkness of polar winter. They hunted caribou and white bears. They carved homes from ice. They learned to endure. One such troll, a female called Scuddy, stood on a frozen cliff watching the aurora dance across the sky. She had been a warrior in Morgoth's army, had fought in battles whose names were already fading from memory. Now she was a hunter, a survivor, a creature of the ice. She did not miss the old days. Not the battles, not the orders, not the certainty of purpose that had turned out to be a cage. Here, in the frozen north, she was as free as any troll could be. The sun barely rose, and when it did, it was weak enough that she could risk moving in its light for short periods. The cold that would kill most creatures meant nothing to her stone-like flesh. But she was alone, the only troll for hundreds of miles, and sometimes, in the long darkness of winter, she wondered if this was better than Angband. At least there she'd been surrounded by her own kind. At least there she had not been alone with her thoughts. A polar bear wandered below her cliff, massive and white, king of this frozen realm. Once, Skadi would have hunted it for food. Now she just watched it pass. She was not hungry. She was rarely hungry anymore. It was as if the cold had frozen something inside her, some need or desire beyond mere survival. She thought of the stories she had heard before fleeing north. Stories of trolls who still served Morgoth's successor, a dark lord named Sauron who was gathering power in the south. Stories of trolls who had learned to live among other creatures, charging tolls or offering services. Stories of trolls who had simply vanished into the deep places and were never seen again. So many paths, so many ways to be. And she had chosen this. Solitude in the ice, peace in the cold, existence without purpose or meaning. Was it enough? The aurora rippled and danced green and gold and purple, one of the few beautiful things in this harsh land. Skadi watched it until it faded with the approach of dawn. Then she retreated to her ice cave and slept, and dreamed of things she could not name. Decades passed, then centuries. The Second Age unfolded, and with it came new kingdoms, new alliances, new wars. But for most trolls, these were distant concerns. They had learned to live in the margins of the world, in the dark places, in the forgotten corners. Some adapted well, others did not. Some formed small communities, learning to work together in ways they never had under Morgoth. Others remained solitary, preferring isolation to the complicated business of coexistence. And some, like Grond in his mountain cave, simply endured, neither happy nor sad, neither flourishing nor fading, just existing one night at a time, waiting for something they could not name and might not recognize if it came. The world above changed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Heroes lived and died. Great deeds were done. And in the darkness, the trolls remained, changed from what they had been, but still themselves, still cursed, still bound to night and shadow, still alive. And for creatures who had been made as weapons, as tools, as things to be used and discarded, being alive was perhaps the only victory they would ever know. The peace, such as it was, could not last forever. For in Middle-earth, darkness has a way of returning, of finding new forms, of rising again when the world thinks it is finally safe. And when darkness returned, it came looking for the trolls. Grond was hunting on a mountainside when the messengers found him. Not orcs this time, but something worse, something older and fouler. The creatures moved like shadows, and their voices were cold as the void between stars. They were servants of Sauron, the Dark Lord who had once been Morgoth's lieutenant and had now claimed his master's mantle. "Stone kin," one of them hissed. "The Lord of Gifts calls you. Sauron, the mighty, the wise, the true heir to Morgoth's power. He offers you purpose again. He offers you glory. He offers you war." Gron looked at the shadow things with his small red eyes. "We had war. We had purpose. It ended in ash and ruin." "That was because Morgoth was weak," another messenger replied, its voice like oil on water. "Sauron is not weak. Sauron is cunning. Sauron will not make the same mistakes. Join him, and you will see a new age of darkness. Refuse, and you will wither in these mountains until you are nothing but stories used to frighten children." It was a compelling argument in its way. Grond had lived centuries now, without purpose beyond mere survival. Part of him, a part he did not like to acknowledge, missed the clarity of the old days, when he knew what he was, when he knew why he existed. But he had also known freedom, limited as it was. He had known peace, and he was not eager to give those up. "I will think on it," he told the shadow things. "Think quickly," they responded. "The Dark Lord's patience is vast, but it is not infinite. He is gathering his forces in the land of Mordor. Those who come willingly will be rewarded. Those who come late will be compelled. And those who refuse..." The shadow things smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. "Well, the Dark Lord has uses for everyone." Then they were gone, melting into darkness as if they had never been. But their words lingered like a bad taste. Gron knew he would have to decide. Stay in his cave and hope Sauron forgot about him, or answer the call and become a weapon once more. Across Middle-earth, other trolls received similar visits. In the troll shores, Tom, Bert, and William huddled in their usual clearing, discussing the offer. "Absolutely not," William said firmly. "I like our life here. We eat well. No one bothers us too much. Why would we give that up to march in some Dark Lord's army?" "Because if we don't," Bert pointed out, "he might send his armies to bother us a lot with swords." "We could fight them off," William suggested without much conviction. Tom shook his massive head. "We could not. We are 3. Sauron commands thousands, tens of thousands. If he truly wanted us, he could take us." "So what do we do?" William asked. Tom was quiet for a long moment. "We go. But we go carefully. We serve, but we do not commit. We stay alive, and we wait for our chance." "Chance for what?" Bert asked. "To be free again," Tom said simply. "However long that takes." In the frozen north, Skadi received no messengers. Perhaps Sauron's servants could not find her in the eternal ice. Perhaps she was too far away to be worth the effort. Or perhaps the Dark Lord was content to let some trolls remain in the wild places, far from his plans. Skadi did not care either way. She was beyond such concerns now. The cold had truly claimed her, in spirit if not in body. She was becoming part of the landscape, as eternal and unchanging as the ice itself. Sometimes, in the long darkness, she wondered if this was what it meant to turn to stone. Not the sudden transformation that came with sunlight, but a slow putrefaction of the soul, a gradual loss of everything that made existence more than simple survival. But she had no answer to that question, and no one to ask. In Mordor, in the black land that would become the seat of Sauron's power, great changes were underway. The Dark Lord was building a fortress that would make Angband seem like a crude copy. Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, rose from the plain like a spike thrust through the heart of the world. Its foundations went deep, deep into the earth, to places where ancient evils slept. Its spires reached high, clawing at the sky like the fingers of a buried titan, and to this place came the trolls. Hundreds of them at first, then thousands. Some came willingly, drawn by promises of purpose and power. Others came in chains, captured by Sauron's servants and compelled to serve. All were put to work. Grond was among those who came willingly, though he took no pride in the decision. He had weighed his options and found them lacking. Stay in his cave and slowly fade into meaninglessness, or serve and at least have purpose, even if that purpose was someone else's. When he first saw Barad-dûr, even his simple mind was awed. It was vast beyond comprehension, a monument to power and ambition that made the fortresses of the First Age seem like children's toys. The tower's shadow fell across the land like a stain, and at its peak a great eye burned, lidless and terrible. But it was what Sauron showed the trolls that truly caught their attention. In the deep dungeons beneath the tower, in chambers lit by forge fire and dark magic, the Dark Lord was creating something new. "Behold," Sauron said, and his voice was beautiful and terrible like honey poured over broken glass. "My greatest work, the Olog High." The trolls looked and saw themselves, or rather, what they could become. The Olog High were trolls, but perfected, or so Sauron claimed. They were taller, stronger, faster. Their hides were tougher, their claws sharper, and most importantly, they could think. Not with the simple, grinding thought of common trolls, but with cunning and strategy, and even a crude understanding of tactics. "You see," Sauron said, addressing the assembled trolls, "I do not make Morgoth's mistakes. He created you as hammers, crude and brutal. I create weapons that can think, can plan, can adapt. Join me willingly, and I will elevate you. Your children, if such a term applies to your kind, will be Olog High, smart enough to lead armies, strong enough to break kingdoms." Grond stared at the Olog High. There was something deeply unsettling about them. They looked like trolls, yes, but their eyes held an intelligence that was almost cunning. They watched the assembled common trolls with what might have been contempt. "What is the price?" Grond asked, surprising himself by speaking. Sauron's gaze fell upon him, and Grond felt as if his very soul was being weighed. "The price? Total obedience, complete loyalty. You will be my servants until the ending of the world, but in return, you will have purpose, you will have meaning, you will matter." Grond thought of his centuries in the cave, of the endless hunting, the endless hiding, the endless existing without reason. And he thought of Bog's question so many ages ago, "Are we alive, or are we just moving stones?" "I will serve," he heard himself say. And around him, other trolls echoed the pledge. Good, Sauron said, and his smile was like the edge of a knife. Then let us begin your education. The training was different from Morgoth's crude methods. Sauron was patient where Morgoth had been brutal. He taught the trolls strategy, not just violence. He showed them how to work together, how to coordinate their attacks, how to use their strength intelligently rather than just flailing at everything in reach. The Olog-hai served as leaders and teachers. They demonstrated tactics. They showed how to breach walls efficiently, how to fight in formation, how to maximize casualties while minimizing their own losses. The common trolls learned slowly, but they learned. And there were other lessons too. Lessons about loyalty and punishment. Trolls who questioned were not killed, not immediately. Instead, they were sent to the breeding pits where Sauron's sorcerers conducted their experiments. Some came back changed, improved in body but broken in spirit. Others did not come back at all. Grond learned to keep his head down, to follow orders, to be the weapon he was made to be. It was easier than thinking, easier than questioning, easier than wondering if there was more to existence than this. The years passed. Sauron's power grew. Barad-dûr rose higher and higher until its shadow fell across half of Mordor. Armies gathered in the Black Land, orcs by the hundreds of thousands, men who had been seduced by promises of power, creatures from the dark places of the world drawn to Sauron's will like moths to flame, and among them all, the trolls. Thousands of them now, common and Olog-hai alike, each one a weapon, each one a tool, each one serving the Dark Lord's grand design, until the day the armies of the last alliance appeared on the horizon. The battle that followed would be remembered in songs and legends for all the ages to come. The last alliance of elves and men, led by Gil-galad the Elf King and Elendil the Tall, bringing their full might against Sauron's power. It was war on a scale that Middle-earth had not seen since the fall of Morgoth. Grond stood in the front ranks as the armies clashed. Around him, Olog-hai roared orders, coordinating the troll battalions with a precision that Morgoth's forces had never achieved. They moved as one, a living wall of stone and muscle, meeting the alliance's charge with terrible force. But the alliance had heroes. They had elves who remembered the First Age, who had fought against Morgoth himself. They had men who wielded weapons forged in ancient times, blessed with power that could pierce even troll hide. And they had something else, hope. Grond killed many that day. He crushed shields and broke swords and sent warriors flying with swings of his massive arms. But he took wounds too. An elf blade pierced his shoulder, finding the same weak spot that had been struck millennia ago. A man's spear drove deep into his thigh. An arrow took him in the eye, and though it did not kill him, the pain was beyond anything he had known. And then, through the chaos of battle, he saw it. Sauron himself, descending from Barad-dûr to face the Alliance leaders. The Dark Lord was terrible to behold, taller than any troll armored in black metal that seemed to drink light. His mace could shatter shields with a touch. His presence alone made the brave quail, but Gil-galad and Elendil stood against him. and in a battle that shook the very foundations of the earth, they struck him down. It cost them their lives. It cost the Alliance thousands of warriors. But Sauron fell, and with his fall, his armies broke. The trolls ran. There was no shame in it, no thought of honor or loyalty. Their master had fallen. Their purpose had shattered. All that remained was survival. They fled into the mountains, into the caves, into the dark places they had come from. Grond fled with them. His wounds bled thick blood. His body screamed in pain. But he ran until he could run no more, until he collapsed in a cave far from Mordor, far from the battlefield, far from everything. Other trolls collapsed around him. Some died of their wounds, others simply lay there, broken in body and spirit. They had served, they had fought, they had lost. "Master is gone," one of them mumbled. "Again." "Yes," Grond replied when he could speak. "Again." What now? Grond closed his good eye. What now, indeed? Twice he had served Dark Lords. Twice those lords had fallen. He was ancient now, by troll standards. He had seen more than any of his kind should see. He had fought in battles that would be legend. He had been a weapon, a servant, a tool. But he had also been, for a brief time, free. "We survive," he said at last. "We go back to the dark places. We live. That is all we can do." The Second Age had ended in fire and blood. The Third Age was beginning. And once again, the trolls would endure, waiting in darkness for whatever came next. And so we come, dear adventurers, to a quieter time in our tale. Not every story must be filled with battles and dark lords. Sometimes the most profound moments happen in the spaces between, in the long years of waiting, in the simple act of enduring. In the forests of the troll shores, in a clearing known only to a few travelers and one unfortunate peddler who never made it home, 3 trolls had made their peace with existence. Tom, Bert, and William had survived the fall of Sauron as they had survived the fall of Morgoth before him. They had returned to their forest, to their simple life of hunting and highway robbery, and they were, in their own way, content. "It's Tuesday," William announced one evening, though he had no real way of knowing what day it was. Trolls did not keep calendars. "It's always Tuesday for you," Bert replied, examining a sheep they had caught earlier. "How should we cook this one? Roasted, boiled, minced into a pie?" "We don't know how to make pies," Tom rumbled from where he sat against a large boulder. His bulk made the stone look small. "Well, we could learn," Bert said defensively. "I'm not saying we're master bakers, but surely we could manage a simple meat pie." "You need an oven for pies," William pointed out, "and flour, and butter, and pastry skills, and patience, all things we lack." "So we roast it then," Bert sighed. "Same as always." "Same as always is good," Tom said. "Roasted sheep night after night, year after year, simple, reliable, no dark lords, no battles, no dying for causes we don't understand." They were quiet for a moment, each contemplating their lot. The forest around them was peaceful. An owl hooted in the distance. A stream babbled over stones somewhere nearby. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, uncaring of the troubles of trolls. Do you ever miss it? William asked suddenly. The armies. The purpose. No, Tom said immediately. Sometimes, Bert admitted. Not the fighting, not the dying. But knowing what we were supposed to do. Having a reason to exist beyond just existing. We have a reason, Tom said. Why don't we survive? That's reason enough. Is it, though? William mused. We hide in the forest. We rob travelers. We eat sheep. We sit around talking about nothing. Is that really living, or is it just not dying? It was a philosophical question, and trolls were not built for philosophy. Their minds were too simple, too focused on the immediate and the practical. But the question hung in the air nonetheless, uncomfortable and unanswered. We're alive, Tom said finally. That's more than most of our kind can say. Most trolls didn't survive the wars. Most didn't find a place to call home, even a place like this. We're lucky. Lucky, William repeated, tasting the word. Is it luck to be cursed to turn to stone in sunlight? Is it luck to be made as weapons and then set loose in a world that fears us? Better than the alternative, Bert said pragmatically, which is not existing at all. They prepared their meal such as it was. Roasted sheep over an open fire, eaten with hands that could crush boulders, but had never learned the delicate art of using utensils. They talked of small things, the weather, which had been unusually wet, the state of the forest paths which were deteriorating, the peddler who had come through last week and had been so terrified he'd abandoned his entire cart. That was good haul, William said happily. All those pots and pans are very useful. We don't cook with pots and pans, Bert pointed out. Well, no, but we could, that's the point. We have options now. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, Tom found himself thinking about the old days despite his earlier denial. He remembered Angband, though the memories were hazy now, worn smooth by centuries. He remembered the clarity of orders, the simplicity of having a purpose handed to you. He remembered other trolls, thousands of them, all moving as one. But he also remembered the fear, the constant threat of punishment, the knowledge that you were nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded as your master saw fit. He remembered watching friends, if trolls could have friends, fall in battles they did not understand, for causes that meant nothing to them. No, he did not miss it. Not really. This simple existence in the forest with its sheep and its travelers and its endless conversations with Bert and William was better. It had to be better. Tell us a story, Tom, William said suddenly. Tell us about the old times. Why? Tom asked. You were there. Not for all of it. You're older than us. You remember things we don't. Tell us about Morgoth. Tell us about the first days. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to speak. I was not there at the very beginning, he said. I was made later, in the final years before the fall, but I knew trolls who were there. Old Grond, for one. He was one of the first. Massive even by our standards. Grey as the mountains he was carved from. What happened to him? Bert asked. I don't know. He survived the fall of Angband. I saw him during Sauron's rise briefly. But after the last alliance, after that great battle, He vanished. Maybe he died. Maybe he's still out there somewhere in some deep cave, waiting. Waiting for what? William asked. Tom shrugged, a gesture that made his massive shoulders roll like hills in an earthquake. For nothing. For something. Does it matter? We're all waiting in the end. He continued his story, speaking of things he half remembered and half imagined. Of Angban's black halls, of balrogs that burn like living fire, of the taste of the first meal he'd ever eaten, an elf warrior who had fought bravely but not well enough, of the terror and wonder of seeing the world for the first time, vast and strange and full of things he could not name. Bert and William listened, rapt. They had their own memories, their own stories, but there was something about hearing them from Tom that made them feel real, made them feel important, as if by remembering they were proving that they had lived, that they mattered, even if only to each other. When Tom finished, the fire had burned to embers. The night was old, and soon they would need to retreat to their cave before dawn threatened. "Thank you," William said quietly. "For what?" Tom asked. "For remembering, for sharing, for—" William struggled to find the words. "For making me feel like we're more than just monsters." "We are monsters," Bert said, "but not unkindly. We kill. We eat things that think and speak. We terrorize travelers. That's what we are." "But we're also people," William insisted. "In our own way, we think, we talk, we remember. Doesn't that count for something?" "Maybe," Tom said. "Maybe it does." They sat in comfortable silence as the embers died. Above them, the stars continued their dance. The forest breathed around them, alive with the sounds of night, and 3 trolls, refugees from an age of darkness, held on to their simple existence with the quiet desperation of those who knew how easily it could all be taken away. Seasons passed, years blurred together. The trolls of Troll Shores continued their routine. Hunt, eat, rob travelers. Sleep through the day in their cave, wake at dusk and do it all again. They had learned over the years to be more strategic about their robberies. Not every traveler needed to be terrified. Some could be bargained with. A toll in exchange for safe passage. Food in exchange for their lives. It was a system, crude but effective. Word spread through the region. If you traveled the Troll Shores at night, bring extra provisions. The trolls who lived there were not reasonable, exactly, but they were predictable. They wanted food more than violence. Give them what they wanted, and you would live to see morning. Of course, not all travelers got the message, and not all trolls were as patient as Tom. One night, a group of dwarves came through the forest. They were heavily armed and clearly spoiling for a fight. When Tom stepped out onto the path and made his usual demand, they responded with insults and axes. "Troll scum!" their leader shouted. "We fear no cave-dwelling coward." "That's uncalled for," Tom said mildly. "We're just trying to make a living here. By robbery and murder." "Well, yes, but it's honest robbery. We're quite upfront about it." The dwarves charged. What followed was brief and brutal. Dwarves were tough, but they were not troll tough. Within minutes, the fight was over. The dwarves lay broken on the path, their courage proven useless against brute strength. Tom stood over them, breathing heavily. He looked at Bert and William, who had emerged to help with the fight. "I didn't want to do that," he said. "They gave you no choice," Bert replied, already searching the bodies for valuables. "They attacked first. Still, they were brave. Stupid, but brave." Tom paused. "Do you think we're the bad guys in this story?" William laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Tom, we're trolls. We're always the bad guys. That's just how it is." "But what if we weren't?" Tom said slowly. "What if we could be something else?" "Like what?" Bert asked. "Heroic trolls, noble trolls, trolls who help people instead of robbing them." "It sounds ridiculous when you say it like that," Tom admitted. "That's because it is ridiculous," William said. "We are what we are. We can't change that. Best we can do is survive and try not to think too hard about it." Tom wanted to argue. He wanted to say that they could be more, could be better. But he knew William was right. They were trolls, made by evil, for evil, cursed with sunlight and simplicity. They could not escape what they were, no matter how much they might wish otherwise. So they took what they could from the dead dwarves and returned to their clearing. They cooked their meal. They talked of nothing, and they waited for the next night, and the night after that, and all the endless nights to come. The years continued to pass, and the 3 trolls of Trollshaws grew into local legend. Mothers warned their children about them. Travelers told stories in taverns. Songs were written, though not flattering ones, about the monsters who lurked in the forest. But the trolls themselves remained unchanged, unchanging. They had found their place in the world, small and limited as it was. They had their forest, their cave, their routine. They had each other for whatever that was worth. And they waited, though for what, none of them could say. Perhaps they were waiting for another Dark Lord to rise and give them purpose. Perhaps they were waiting for the world to forget about them, to let them fade into obscurity. Perhaps they were waiting for nothing at all, simply enduring because endurance was all they knew. On clear nights, when the stars were bright and the forest was quiet, Tom would sometimes think about the question William had asked. Is this living, or is it just not dying? He never found an answer, but he kept existing anyway, one night at a time, one sheep at a time, one conversation at a time. Because that was what trolls did. They endured. And in the darkness of the Trollshaws, beneath the uncaring stars, 3 trolls continued their wait. For something, for nothing, for whatever the future would bring. The long wait stretched on, and now, dear adventurers, we come to a night that would be remembered in songs and tales. A night when a company of dwarves and a hobbit and a wizard passed through the Trollshaws. You know this story, perhaps, but you have never heard it told from the troll's perspective. So listen and learn how legend looks through different eyes. The evening began like any other. Tom, Bert, and William were hungry. This was not unusual. Trolls were always hungry. But tonight, the hunger was particularly sharp. They had not caught anything substantial in 3 days. A few rabbits, some squirrels, nothing that satisfied the deep, gnawing emptiness in their bellies. "I am starving," William complained for perhaps the 100th time. absolutely starving. My stomach thinks my throat's been cut." "Your stomach is right to worry," Bert replied. "At this rate, we'll be eating rocks by morning." "Rocks might taste better than those squirrels," William muttered. Tom was not listening to their bickering. His attention was fixed on the forest path. His hearing, sharp despite his simple mind, had caught something. Sounds, many sounds. The jingle of harnesses, the stamp of hooves, the murmur of voices speaking in low tones. "Quiet," he rumbled. "Something comes." The other two fell silent immediately. They had learned to trust Tom's instincts. They melted back into the shadows, massive forms somehow becoming nearly invisible in the darkness beneath the trees. The sounds grew closer, and then around a bend in the path came the most curious group Tom had ever seen. Ponies! 13 of them, laden with packs and supplies. And on those ponies, or walking beside them, were dwarves. Actual dwarves with their long beards and their stern faces and their gleaming weapons. Tom counted them quickly. 13 dwarves. Unlucky number, that. But there was more. One of the ponies carried a creature Tom had never seen before. Small, smaller even than a dwarf, with curly hair and enormous feet and a look of profound unhappiness on its round face. "What is that?" William whispered. "No idea," Bert replied. "Some kind of child?" "It's got very large feet for a child," William observed. Tom was less interested in the strange small creature and more interested in the ponies. Ponies meant meat. Lots of meat. More meat than they had seen in months. His mouth watered at the thought. "We take them," he decided. "Quiet, wait until they make camp." The dwarves and their strange companion did indeed make camp, choosing a clearing not far from where the trolls lurked. They unsaddled their ponies and began to set up for the night. The small creature, the one with the big feet, was sent to tend to the ponies while the dwarves prepared food. This was perfect. Tom signaled to Bert and William. The plan was simple, as all good troll plans were. Wait until the dwarves were distracted, sneak around, grab ponies, run before the dwarves realized what was happening. It should have worked. It would have worked if not for the small creature. William was creeping towards the ponies, moving with surprising stealth for something his size, when the small creature suddenly appeared right in front of him. They stared at each other for a long moment, troll and whatever it was equally startled. Said the small creature. "Hello?" William did what came naturally. He grabbed it. The small creature began to squirm and shout, "Help! Help! Trolls, there are trolls!" The dwarves came running, weapons drawn, shouting battle cries in their harsh language. The careful plan fell apart instantly. Tom and Bert rushed in to help William. Ponies scattered in all directions. The dwarves formed a defensive circle around their camp, ready to fight. And then chaos truly erupted. What followed was not a battle, exactly. It was more like a very violent game of catch. The trolls would grab a dwarf, and other dwarves would attack to free him. Then they would grab another dwarf, and the same thing would happen. The dwarves were brave, Tom had to admit. Incredibly brave. But bravery alone could not overcome the simple fact that each troll was worth about 10 dwarves in terms of strength. Slowly, despite their best efforts, the dwarves were captured. One by one, They were stuffed into sacks that Bert had helpfully produced from their stores. The small creature was caught and sacked as well, despite putting up a surprisingly fierce resistance. "Right," Tom said, surveying their captives. 13 sacks, each one containing a struggling, shouting dwarf or small creature. "Now we cook them." "How should we cook them?" Bert asked, falling back into their familiar debate. "Roasted? Boiled? With sage and onions?" William suggested hopefully. "We don't have sage and onions," Tom pointed out. "Well, that's just poor planning on our part," William said. The dwarves, meanwhile, were shouting from their sacks. Threats, mostly. Promises of what they would do if they got free. Some very creative cursing in Dwarvish that Tom did not understand, but could appreciate for its passion. "We could just roast them," Bert said. "Simple. Effective." "They'll be tough," William complained. "Dwarves are all muscle and gristle. We should boil them first, tenderize them." "That takes too long," Tom said. "I'm hungry now." They argued. This was familiar ground for them. They could argue about cooking methods for hours, had argued about such things for decades. It was almost comforting, in a way. Even in the midst of capturing a company of dwarves, they could fall back into their old patterns. But something was wrong. Tom felt it first, a prickling at the back of his neck, a sense that they were being watched. He looked around the clearing, his small eyes trying to penetrate the shadows. "Do you hear that?" he asked suddenly. "Hear what?" Bert replied. "Voices, arguing." William laughed. "That's us, you dolt. We're arguing." "No," Tom said slowly. "Other voices. Different voices." And then he heard it clearly, his own voice, but it was not coming from his mouth. "Let's roast them," said Tom's voice from somewhere in the trees. "No, let's boil them," replied Bert's voice, though Bert's mouth was closed. Tom and Bert looked at each other in confusion. William was the first to figure it out. "Someone's imitating us!" he cried. They spun around, trying to find the source of the voices, but the forest was dark and the voices seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I'm hungry," said William's voice. "So am I," replied Tom's voice. "Why, what should we eat first?" asked Bert's voice. The real trolls were completely confused now. They shouted at each other, trying to coordinate, but the false voices kept interrupting, causing chaos and confusion. They began to argue with themselves, or with the voices, or with each other. It was impossible to tell which was which. "You're an idiot," Tom's voice said. "No, you're an idiot," replied Tom's actual voice. "We're all idiots," William shouted, not sure if he was responding to a real comment or a false one. The argument escalated. The trolls, already on edge from the excitement of capturing the dwarves, became more and more agitated. They pushed each other. They shouted. They completely forgot about their captives in the chaos of trying to figure out what was happening. And they did not notice the time passing, did not notice the stars beginning to fade, did not notice the first hint of gray appearing in the eastern sky. "I think we should start with the fat one," said a voice that might have been Bert's. "I'm not fat," replied a voice that might have been William's. "You're both idiots," shouted a voice that might have been Tom's. By the time Tom realized what was happening, it was too late. The sky had lightened from black to gray to the pale blue of pre-dawn. The stars had fled, and in the east, the first edge of the sun appeared above the horizon. "No," Tom said, real fear in his voice for the first time. "No, no, no." The sunlight touched his skin. It did not hurt, not at first. It felt warm, almost pleasant. But then the warmth became heat, and the heat became something else, something final. Tom tried to move, but found he could not. His legs had become rooted to the spot. He looked down and saw his feet turning gray, then hard, then solid stone. The transformation was spreading, creeping up his legs like frost across a window. "Tom!" Bert shouted, reaching for him. But Bert was transforming too. His hand froze halfway to Tom, fingers outstretched, forever reaching for a friend he could not save. William was screaming, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly as the stone claimed his throat, his head, his mind. His last expression was one of surprise and fear, frozen forever on a face that had laughed and complained and lived for so many centuries. Tom felt the stone claim his chest, his shoulders, his neck. His thoughts were slowing, becoming heavy and sluggish. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, but his jaw had locked. His tongue had turned to stone. His last thought, before the darkness claimed him entirely, was a strange one. After all those years of waiting, after all those endless nights of existing without purpose, he had finally found something. He had found friends, brothers, in their own simple way, and now, in the last moment, he realized how much that had mattered. Then the sun rose fully, bathing the clearing in golden light, and where 3 trolls had stood there were now 3 statues, crude, rough, frozen in their last moments of panic and confusion. They would stand there forever, the 3 trolls of Trollshaws, a monument to foolishness, perhaps, or to the cruelty of curses, or simply to bad timing. "Oh!" From behind a nearby tree, Gandalf the wizard emerged, his grey robes blending with the morning mist. He looked at the stone trolls with an expression that was neither happy nor sad, simply tired. "Oh, foolish creatures," he murmured. "But then, you never had a choice, did you? Made for darkness, cursed to fear the light. Almost I could pity you." The dwarves were extracting themselves from their sacks, bruised and angry, but alive. The small creature, a hobbit named Bilbo as it turned out, stared at the stone trolls with wide eyes. "Are they dead?" Bilbo asked. "They were never truly alive," Gandalf replied. "Not in the way you understand life. They were things made, not born, tools shaped for evil purposes. But they endured long past their creators, and in that endurance perhaps they found something like life." He turned away from the statues. "Come, we have a long road ahead and much to do. Let these stones stand as a warning to all who would serve darkness. In the end, the sun rises, and darkness, no matter how long it lasts, must always give way to light." The company left the clearing, continuing their journey toward the lonely mountain and their own destiny behind them. 3 stone trolls stood silent vigil, forever frozen, forever waiting for a night that would never come again. But if you listened very carefully, on certain nights when the moon was full and the stars were bright, you might hear something, a whisper of wind through stone, a memory of voices arguing about cooking methods and complaining about hunger and wondering if there was more to existence than simple survival. They had been monsters, they had been weapons, they had been cursed, but for a little while in a forest clearing, arguing about sheep and travelers and nothing at all, they had also been something else. They had been friends, and that, dear adventurers, was perhaps the greatest magic of all, that even creatures made for evil, cursed from their creation, could find something like companionship in the darkness, could find moments of peace between the violence, could find in their own simple way meaning. The stone trolls stand there still, in the troll shores. Perhaps you have seen them, if you have traveled those paths. 3 rough statues, frozen forever in confusion and fear. But now you know their story, and knowing, perhaps you can see them differently. Not just as monsters to fear, but as beings who, in their own way, tried to make sense of an existence they never asked for. May they find peace in their eternal stone sleep. May their wait finally be over. But not all trolls met their end in sunlight, dear adventurers. Some delved deeper into the earth where the sun could never reach, where darkness was eternal and absolute. Let us now descend into those depths, into the ancient halls of Moria, where another kind of troll made their kingdom. Deep beneath the misty mountains, in tunnels carved by dwarven hands in ages past, the cave trolls reigned. These were different from their forest-dwelling kin. Larger, darker, their skin had taken on the color of the stone around them. Centuries in absolute darkness had changed them, made them creatures of the deep places, more comfortable in the earth's embrace than they had ever been under open sky. One such troll was called Grom. He was old, even by troll standards, old enough to remember the fall of Sauron, though the memories were hazy now, worn smooth like water over stone. He had fled into these mountains after that great defeat, seeking refuge in the deep places, and here, in the abandoned halls of the dwarves, he had found a kind of home. Moria had been magnificent once. The dwarves called it Khazad-dûm, the mansion of the Khazad, and they had delved deep and built high. Great halls with pillars carved from living rock, bridges that spanned chasms so deep their bottoms were lost to darkness, chambers filled with veins of mithril, that precious silver metal that was worth more than gold. But the dwarves had delved too deep. They had awakened something terrible in the roots of the mountain, a Balrog from the ancient world, and it had driven them out. Now, Moria was empty of dwarves, empty of light, empty of all the craft and beauty that had once filled its halls. But it was not empty of life. Orcs had moved in, as orcs always did when darkness offered shelter. Goblins scuttled through the tunnels. Bats the size of eagles roosted in the high vaults, and trolls, cave trolls like Grom, made their lairs in the deeper places. Grom's lair was in what had once been a storage chamber. The dwarves had carved it with their usual skill, every corner precise, every surface smooth. But now it was crude again, littered with bones and filth, marked by the presence of something that cared nothing for beauty or order. He was not alone in Moria. There were perhaps 24 cave trolls scattered throughout the vast network of tunnels and halls. They did not form communities, not really. Trolls were too solitary, too simple for that. But they knew of each other. They had territories, rough boundaries that they respected. They sometimes met at the feeding grounds, where the orcs would drive prey for them to hunt. The orcs. That was an interesting development. After the fall of Sauron, the orcs had needed to adapt just as the trolls had. Without a dark lord to command them, they had formed their own crude society. Tribes and war bands constantly fighting among themselves but united in their hatred of the outside world. The orcs of Moria had learned to use the trolls, not as servants exactly. Trolls could not be ordered about like they once had been, but as weapons, as monsters to unleash on enemies. In exchange, the orcs fed the trolls, drove prey into their lairs, and left them otherwise alone. It was a practical arrangement. Grom did not like orcs. They were loud and stupid, and they smelled terrible, but they were useful. And in Moria, in the darkness, usefulness was what mattered. One evening, or what passed for evening in a place where the sun never shone, Grom was summoned by the orc chieftain. This was unusual. The orcs usually left him alone except during feeding times. He made his way through the tunnels, his massive bulk barely fitting in some of the passages that the dwarves had sized for their shorter frames. The chieftain's hall was in what had once been a grand dining chamber. Now it was a crude mockery of its former glory. The long tables were broken. The carved pillars were defaced. Orc banners hung where dwarven shields had once gleamed. The chieftain was called Azog, though he was not the famous Azog of old. Just another orc with ambition and cunning enough to hold power. He looked up as Grom entered, showing no fear despite the troll being 10 times his size. "Stonekin," Azog said in the rough common tongue. "We have problem." Grom waited. Words came slowly to him these days. He used them only when necessary. "Dwarves," Azog continued, "they come to reclaim their halls. We hear reports, an army maybe, or a company, coming through the east gate." Grom rumbled, a sound like distant thunder in the halls. "Why, tell me." "Because we fight them," Azog said. "Orcs and trolls together, like old days. You remember old days, yes? When we served the Dark Lord?" "I remember," Grom said, and he did, though he wished he did not. He remembered the clarity of those days, the simplicity of having a purpose, but he also remembered the cost. "You fight for us," Azog said. "We give you much meat, much food, good deal." It was not really a question, Grom understood. It was a statement. The orcs had given him shelter, had fed him, had left him in peace. Now they were calling in that debt. It was how things worked in Moria. Everything had a price. "When?" Grom asked. "Soon. Maybe days, maybe weeks. We wait, we watch. When dwarves come, we kill them all." Azog grinned, showing his pointed teeth. "We'll be glorious." Grom said nothing. He turned and left the hall, making his way back to his lair through the winding tunnels. Glorious! The orcs still thought in terms of glory and honor in victory, but Grom was old. He knew there was no glory in violence. There was only survival and death and precious little else. The dwarves did not come. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The orcs remained on alert, posting sentries at all the entrances, sending scouts into the surrounding mountains. But no army appeared. No company of dwarves came to reclaim their ancient halls. Grom returned to his routine. Hunt, eat, sleep, exist. The threat of battle faded like a half-remembered dream. Perhaps the reports had been false. Perhaps the dwarves had decided Moria was not worth reclaiming. Perhaps they had been defeated elsewhere, or distracted, or simply changed their minds. It did not matter to Grom. He had learned over his long existence that it was pointless to worry about things beyond his control. The future would come whether he worried or not. Better to focus on the present, on the immediate, on the simple act of surviving one more day. Years passed. Decades. Grom grew older, larger, more set in his ways. The other cave trolls came and went. Some died, caught in orc feuds or crushed in tunnel collapses. Others simply vanished, wandering off into the deepest parts of Moria, never returning. Once Grom encountered a younger troll in the tunnels, barely 50 years old and still adjusting to life in the depths. "Is it always like this?" the young troll asked. "Darkness and hunting and nothing else?" "Yes," Grom replied simply. "That's all. Nothing more. That's all." The young troll looked disappointed but not surprised. "I thought maybe I heard stories about the old days, when we had purpose, when we mattered. We mattered as weapons," Grom said, "as tools. Is that what you want? To matter like that?" The young troll thought about it. "I don't know, maybe. At least then we knew what we were for." Grom had no answer to that. He left the young troll standing in the tunnel and continued on his way. But the conversation stayed with him, gnawing at his mind like hunger gnawed at his belly. Was it better to have purpose, even if that purpose was to serve evil? Or was it better to be free, even if that freedom was hollow and meaningless? He did not know. He did not think he would ever know. The deepest parts of Moria held secrets that even the orcs feared. There were passages that led down, 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 to places where the air grew hot and sulphurous, where the stone itself seemed to pulse with ancient malice, where something old and terrible slept, or waited, or simply existed in the dark. The Balrog, Durin's bane, the thing that had driven the dwarves from their home and claimed Moria as its own domain. Grom had never seen it, not clearly, but he had felt its presence, a weight in the air, a heat in the deep places, a sense of power that made even trolls' strength seem insignificant. The orcs worshipped it in their way. They left offerings in the deepest chambers. They chanted prayers to their ancient god of fire and shadow. But the Balrog did not care. It slept, or meditated, or did whatever ancient demons did in the darkness. It had no interest in orcs or trolls or any of the lesser creatures that scurried through its domain. It was patient. It would outlast them all, and the mountains themselves, and perhaps even the world. Sometimes Grom wondered what it would be like to be so powerful, so ancient, so beyond the concerns of smaller beings, to exist without hunger or fear, or the constant gnawing awareness of your own limitations. But then he would remember that the Balrog was alone, utterly, completely alone, the last of its kind in Middle-earth, and he wondered if that power was worth that loneliness. The orcs' paranoia about dwarf invasion eventually faded. Years passed without incident. The sentries were withdrawn. Life in Moria returned to its normal rhythm of violence and survival. But Grom had learned something from the scare. He had learned that the outside world still existed, still turned, still changed. Moria was not separate from Middle-earth, no matter how deep they delved or how dark they kept their halls. The world would come for them eventually. It always did. He began to prepare, in his own simple way. He stockpiled food in his lair, more than he could eat in months. He scouted escape routes through the tunnels, paths that led deeper still, to places where even orcs did not venture. He made himself ready for the day when everything would change again, because it would change. It always did. Dark lords rose and fell, kingdoms came and went. Even mountains, eternal as they seemed, were ground down by time, and trolls, cursed and simple as they were, endured through it all, adapting, surviving, waiting. Grom stood in his lair one night, if night meant anything in the perpetual darkness. He thought about the young troll's question, about purpose and meaning, about whether their existence had value beyond simple survival. He had no answer, but he was still here, still alive, still enduring. And perhaps in a world where so many had fallen, where so many had been crushed by the weight of history and circumstance, endurance itself was a kind of victory. The stone around him was solid, eternal, uncaring, but it was also familiar, comforting in its way. He was part of it now, part of the mountain, part of the darkness. He had lived so long in the depths that he could hardly remember what the sky looked like, what stars were, what it felt like to stand in open air. But he remembered other things, the taste of his first meal, the fear in his first battle, the loss of friends he barely understood how to grieve, the long years of servitude, and the strange freedom that followed. He remembered it all, and in remembering he kept it alive, kept the past alive, kept the story alive, even if he was the only one who remembered, even if no one would ever hear his tale. In the darkness of Moria, where no light had shone for ages, where no song had been sung in living memory, a single troll stood and remembered. And that was enough. It had to be enough. And so we come, dear adventurers, to the final chapter of the Great Wars, to the time when Sauron rose once more, when the ring was found, and when all of Middle-earth trembled on the brink of eternal darkness. The trolls, scattered and forgotten for so long, would be called to war one last time. In his mountain lair, Grond felt it before he saw it, a pull, a compulsion, a voice that spoke not in words but in the very bones of the earth. It was a voice he had not heard in an age, and yet he recognized it instantly. Sauron had returned. The call went out across Middle-earth, touching every troll who still lived. Come, serve, return to your purpose. And this time, the call was different. It was not a request. It was not even a command. It was deeper than that. It was written into their very nature, woven into the curse that made them what they were. Grond stood in his cave, ancient beyond reckoning now, and felt the weight of that call. He could resist. He had learned over the centuries that he had some measure of choice. He was not a puppet, not entirely. He could stay in his cave. He could hide. He could refuse. But refusing had consequences. He felt them already, a pain in his chest that had nothing to do with physical hurt, a gnawing ache that went deeper than hunger, the pain of denying what you were made to be. So Grond left his cave. For perhaps the last time, he emerged into the night and began the long journey south, toward Mordor, toward the Dark Tower, toward the ending of all things. He was not alone on the roads. Other trolls converged from across Middle-earth, drawn by the same irresistible call. Hill trolls from the forest, cave trolls from the deep places, even a few snow trolls from the far north. Pale as ice, their eyes squinting against the relative warmth of southern lands. They did not speak much. Trolls were never great conversationalists, but there was a shared understanding among them. They were going to war. They would likely die, and there was nothing to be done about it. At the Black Gate of Mordor they gathered, thousands of trolls, the largest assembly of their kind since the fall of Morgoth, and among them walked the Olog High, Sauron's perfected creations, tall and terrible and intelligent. They organized the common trolls into battalions, assigned them roles, prepared them for the battles to come. One of the Olog High approached Grond. He was massive even by troll standards, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that gleamed with unmistakable cunning. "You are old," the Olog High observed. His voice was clear, articulate in a way that common troll speech never was. "One of the first made. I can see it in the way you stand, in the age marks on your skin." "I am old," Grond agreed. "You have fought in both great wars. You have served both Dark Lords. You have survived when so many fell." The Olog High studied him. "Why do you return now? You could have hidden. You could have refused the call." "Could I?" Grond asked simply. The Olog High smiled, revealing teeth that was sharper than any common troll's. "No, I suppose not. We are what we are made to be. That is our curse and our nature." He paused. "I am called Goroth. I will be leading your battalion. You will fight at the siege of Minas Tirith. Do you know what that is?" "White City," Grond said. "Men's stronghold." "Yes. It is the last great fortress of men in the west. If it falls, the war is won. Sauron will reign supreme, and a new age of darkness will begin." Goroth's eyes gleamed. "You will help us break their gates. You will help us crush their defenders. You will help us end the age of men." Grond said nothing. What was there to say? He would do what he was made to do. He always had. The army that marched from Mordor was vast beyond imagining. Orcs by the hundreds of thousands bred in the deep pits beneath Barad-dûr, men from the east and south corrupted by promises of power, fell beasts that flew through the air bearing the Nazgûl, those terrible wraith kings who served Sauron's will, and the trolls, battalions of them, each one a weapon of living stone. They marched for days across the ashen plains of Mordor, through the pass at Cirith Ungol and into the lands of Gondor. The sky above was dark, with clouds that Sauron himself had summoned, blocking the sun so that his trolls could march by day as well as night. Grond marched in the middle of his battalion, surrounded by other trolls, all moving in grim silence. He thought, as they walked, about the paths that had led him here, the countless battles, the endless servitude, the brief moments of freedom between the wars, all of it leading to this. One final battle, one last service to darkness. Was this what he wanted? No, but want had never mattered for trolls. They did not get to want. Minas Tirith rose before them like a defiant finger pointed at the sky. 7 levels of white stone, each one higher than the last, climbing the mountainside like a crown. At its peak, the Tower of Ecthelion caught what little light penetrated the clouds, blazing like a beacon. It was beautiful. Even Grond, simple as he was, could see that. The craftsmanship of it, the audacity of building something so tall and bright in a world that held so much darkness. For a moment, looking at those white walls, Grond almost understood what the free peoples were fighting for. Then Goroth's voice cut through his thoughts. "Battalion! Prepare siege equipment. We attack at dawn." What followed was chaos on a scale that made the battles of the First Age seem small. Catapults hurled burning pitch over the walls. Siege towers rolled forward, filled with orcs eager to scale the defenses. And the trolls, the massive battering ram trolls, were brought forward to break the great gate. Grond himself was harnessed to one of these rams, along with a dozen other trolls. The ram was massive, carved to look like a snarling wolf's head, and it took all their strength to move it forward under the rain of arrows and stones from above. The defenders of Minas Tirith fought with desperate courage. Arrows flew like rain. Stones fell from the walls. Boiling oil was poured on the attackers. Men shouted battle cries in their harsh language. But courage alone could not stand against such numbers, such overwhelming force. The rams struck the gate once, twice, 3 times. The ancient wood, strengthened with magic and craft, held firm. But on the 4th strike, it cracked. On the 5th, it splintered. And on the 6th, the gates of Minas Tirith, which had stood for thousands of years, broke open. The army poured through, trolls and orcs and men, all surging into the lower levels of the city. The defenders fell back, fighting step by step, making them pay for every inch of ground. Buildings burned, streets ran red. The white stone was stained with blood and ash. Grond fought because he had to, because he was made to, because there was nothing else. He crushed soldiers in their armor. He broke apart their defensive formations. He did what trolls did. He destroyed. But something was different this time. Something in the air had changed. The darkness that Sauron had summoned was lifting. Light was breaking through the clouds, and from somewhere outside the city, Grond heard horns. War horns, clear and bright, calling across the plain. Reinforcements. The defenders had reinforcements. What followed was the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and it would be remembered as one of the greatest battles in all the history of Middle-earth. The riders of Rohan crashed into Sauron's forces like an avalanche. Led by their king, they charged with reckless courage, their horses like thunder across the plain. The trolls met them with savage fury. Gron grabbed a horse and rider together, lifting them high and throwing them into the ranks of their own cavalry. But there were so many riders, so many spears, so much courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. And then, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The forces of Gondor rallied. The riders of Rohan pressed their advantage, and from the south, ships appeared on the river, bearing banners of hope and reinforcement. The battle raged for hours. Grond lost track of time, lost track of everything except the immediate need to survive. He saw Goroth fall, brought down by a dozen spears from mounted knights. He saw other trolls crushed beneath cavalry charges or brought down by concentrated arrow fire. And he saw the Witch King, the greatest of the Nazgul, the terror of nations, fall to a woman and a halfling. Impossible, unthinkable, and yet it happened. The army of Mordor broke, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, like a dam crumbling. Orders became confused, formations scattered. The orcs began to flee, and the trolls, leaderless now without the Olog High, did not know what to do. Grond retreated with the survivors, back through the broken gate, back across the Pelennor fields, back toward Mordor. They had failed. The city still stood. The defenders still lived, and somewhere in the distance Grond could feel something else. A tremor in the very foundations of Sauron's power. Something was happening. Something important. Something final. They were at the Black Gate when it happened. The remnants of Sauron's army had regrouped there, making a desperate last stand against the forces of the West who had pursued them. It should have been an easy victory for Mordor. They still had the numbers. They still had the strength. But then the earth began to shake. Not a small tremor, but a convulsion that shook the very bones of the world. Grond looked toward Mount Doom and saw it erupting, fire and ash pouring from its peak like blood from a wound. And he felt it. Felt the Dark Lord's power shatter. Felt the compulsion that had driven him all his life suddenly snap like a broken chain. Felt for the first time in his existence truly free. The orcs felt it too. They screamed and scattered, running in all directions, their minds breaking under the sudden absence of the will that had dominated them for so long. Some fell where they stood, others fled into the wasteland. All of them were lost, purposeless, empty. The trolls stood frozen. What did you do when the only purpose you had ever known suddenly vanished? Where did you go when your master fell and set you free? Run, Gron said to the trolls near him. Hide, survive. He did not wait to see if they obeyed. He turned and began to run, back toward the mountains, back toward the deep places, back toward anywhere that was not here, not this place of death and endings. Behind him, Barad-dûr collapsed. The great tower that had dominated the landscape, that had been the center of so much power and evil, fell like a child's toy. Its stones crashed down, its foundations crumbled, and with it went the last remnants of Sauron's might. The Third Age was ending. The age of dominion by Dark Lords was over. And the trolls, those ancient servants of darkness, were left adrift in a world that no longer had a place for them. Grond ran until he could run no more. He collapsed in a cave far from Mordor, far from the battlefields, far from everything. His body was covered in wounds. His mind was reeling from the sudden freedom, the sudden absence of purpose. Other trolls found the cave over the following days. Survivors like him, lost like him, purposeless like him. They sat in silence, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. "Is over?" one of them finally asked. "Yes," Grond replied, "is over. What do we do now?" Grond looked at the young troll who had asked. He saw fear in those simple eyes, fear and confusion, and a desperate need for someone to tell him what to do, to give him purpose, to make sense of a senseless world. "We survive," Grond said, the same answer he had given so many times before. "We find dark places, we hide, we live." Why? It was the eternal question. The question Bog had asked in the First Age. The question Tom had pondered in his forest. The question every troll asked at some point in their existence. And finally, after all the ages, after all the wars, after all the service and suffering, Grond had an answer. "Because we can," he said simply. "Because we are here. Because life, even cursed life, even simple life, is worth living. That is reason enough." The young troll did not look convinced, but he nodded and settled down to rest. And Grond, ancient beyond measure, scarred by wars that would become legend, closed his eyes and allowed himself for the first time in ages to hope. Hope that somewhere in this new age there might be a place for trolls. Hope that freedom, however frightening, might lead to something better than servitude. Hope that the long night of his kind might finally, mercifully, be over. The war was done. The Dark Lords had fallen, and the trolls, against all odds, endured. The Fourth Age dawned on a world forever changed, dear adventurers. The ring was destroyed. Sauron was defeated. The dark places of Middle-earth were cleansed one by one, as the free peoples reclaimed their lands. It was an age of rebuilding, of healing, of hope renewed. But for the trolls, it was an age of fading. They scattered to the furthest corners of the world, seeking places where the expanding kingdoms of men and elves could not reach. Deep caves, remote mountains, the frozen wastes of the north. Anywhere they might survive, might endure, might simply exist without being hunted. Because hunted they were. Men remembered the siege of Minas Tirith. They remembered the trolls breaking their gates, crushing their defenders, serving the darkness with mindless loyalty. Heroes arose who made their names hunting down the survivors, tracking them to their lairs and ending them. Grond heard the stories as he wandered, stories of troll slayers, stories of great hunts and final battles, stories of his kind being driven to extinction, one by one, until only scattered remnants remained. He had returned to the misty mountains, to the general region of his old cave, though not to the cave itself. Too many memories there, too much weight of ages. Instead, he found a new shelter, higher in the mountains, more remote, more easily defended, and there he waited. For what? He no longer knew. Sawayamad, the years passed quietly. Grand hunted when he needed to, slept when he was tired, and otherwise simply existed. He saw no other trolls. He saw few creatures of any kind. The high mountains were empty, clean, as if the world was slowly forgetting that such places existed. Sometimes, on his hunts, he would see signs of men, a shepherd's hut in a valley, smoke from a distant village. Once he glimpsed a company of travelers on the road far below, moving along paths that would have been too dangerous to travel in the old days. The world was healing, growing, expanding into places that had once been wild and perilous, and there was less and less room in it for creatures like him. One night, as he stood on a high peak watching the stars, Grond heard something. A voice. No, not a voice. A memory of a voice. Barg, asking his eternal question. Are we alive? Or are we just moving stones? We are alive, Grond said to the empty air. We are. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. He hunted, yes, he ate, he slept. But was that living? Or was it just the mechanical continuation of existence? When had he last felt something beyond basic need? When had he last wanted anything? Hoped for anything? Cared about anything? He could not remember. In the Troll Shores, where 3 stone statues still stood in their eternal vigil, the forest had changed. New trees grew where old ones had fallen. The paths that travelers had once feared were now considered safe, guarded by rangers who patrolled regularly. Children played in clearings where orcs had once lurked. An old man came to the clearing where the stone trolls stood. He was weathered and grey, with keen eyes and a staff of dark wood. He looked at the 3 statues for a long moment, remembering a night many years ago when he had saved a company of dwarves and a hobbit by keeping 3 foolish trolls arguing until dawn. Ah, still here, Gandalf murmured. Still waiting, I wonder. Do you dream, trapped in stone? Do you remember what you were? Or is it simply darkness, eternal and unchanging? He reached out and touched Tom's stone shoulder. The rock was cold and rough, covered in lichen and moss. Birds had nested in the crevices. Time was slowly eroding the details, wearing away the faces until someday they would be nothing but rough boulders, indistinguishable from natural stone. You were foolish creatures, Gandalf said quietly, simple and cruel and dangerous. But you were also victims in your way, made for evil purposes, cursed from birth, never given a choice in what you would become. He sighed. I hope you find peace in your stone sleep. I hope the darkness is kind to you. He turned and walked away, leaving the 3 trolls to their eternal waiting. Behind him, in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, the statues stood silent, monuments to a war long over, markers of an age that had passed, memories in stone. In the deep places beneath the misty mountains, in the ruins of Moria, the remaining cave trolls dwindled. Grom still lived, ancient and massive, but he was nearly alone now. Most of his kind had either died or fled to even deeper places, driven by dwarf expeditions that had begun cautiously, to explore their former home. The dwarves had not yet returned in force. The shadow of the Balrog still lingered, even though the creature itself had fallen in a legendary battle with a wizard. But scouts came, and workers, and slowly the halls were being reclaimed. Grom watched from the deepest tunnels. He did not attack, did not threaten. He simply observed a relic from another age, watching the world change around him. One day a dwarf scout found his lair. The dwarf froze, hand on his axe, staring at the massive troll who sat in the darkness like a living statue. "You're one of the old ones," the dwarf said, speaking in the common tongue. "From the wars," Grom nodded slowly. "You served the darkness." Another nod. "But you're not attacking. Why?" Grom thought about how to answer. Words came even slower now than they had in his youth. "No master," he said finally. "No orders. Just exist." The dwarf studied him for a long moment. "Are you the last one down here?" "Maybe. Don't know. Will you leave? If we ask you to leave?" Grom looked around his lair, the cave that had been his home for so long, the darkness that had sheltered him. "Where would I go?" It was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. Where did a cave troll go in an age that had no place for cave trolls? The dwarf seemed to understand. He lowered his axe slightly. "I'll tell the others about you. We'll leave this area alone. For now. The deep tunnels are still dangerous anyway. We're not ready to reclaim them yet." "Thank you," Grom said, surprising himself. The dwarf nodded and left. And Grom was alone again, but somehow the loneliness felt different now. Less absolute. The world was changing, yes. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a small place in it for creatures like him. Even if that place was only a forgotten cave in the deep dark. Stories spread across Middle-earth as the years passed. Stories of troll sightings always growing more rare. A shepherd would report seeing something massive moving in the mountains at night. A traveling merchant would claim he had been stopped by a troll on a remote road, though the troll had only asked for food and let him pass unharmed. Children grew up hearing about the trolls, but they were stories now, legends, things from the old times, when darkness ruled and monsters walked freely, not real threats. Not anymore. Grond heard some of these stories from travelers, whose conversations carried up the mountainside. He heard himself turned into a legend, though the stories got the details wrong. In the tales, he was larger than he really was, more fierce, more terrible. He had fought 100 warriors single-handed. He had served directly under Sauron himself. The truth was simpler and sadder. He was just a troll. Ancient, yes. Experienced, certainly. But still just a simple creature trying to survive in a world that had moved on without him. One autumn evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the high peaks, Grond made a decision. He would leave. He would travel north to the frozen lands where his kind had once thrived. Perhaps there, in the eternal ice, he might find others. Perhaps there he might find a place to finally rest. Or perhaps he would simply wander until his strength failed and he fell, becoming just another stone in the vast wilderness. Either way, it was time Time to leave the mountains he had called home for so long. Time to seek something new, even if he did not know what that something was. He packed nothing, for trolls had no possessions beyond what they carried in their memories. He simply stood, stretched his ancient limbs, and began to walk north under the stars. Behind him, his cave stood empty. Before him, the unknown waited, and Grond walked forward to meet it, one heavy step at a time, as patient and enduring as the stone from which he had been made. Across Middle-earth, other trolls made similar journeys. Some went north like Grond, seeking the ice lands. Others went east into mountains that had no names, into lands that maps did not show. A few went west toward the sea, though what they hoped to find there, even they did not know. They were scattering, dispersing, fading into the wild places like morning mist under the rising sun. Each one alone, each one carrying the weight of ages, each one looking for something they could not name. Peace, perhaps, or simply an ending. A place to finally rest after so many years of service and suffering and survival. The trolls were becoming stories, legends, echoes of a darker age growing fainter with each passing year, and someday, perhaps not so far in the future, they would be gone entirely. No more trolls would walk in the night. No more stonekin would trouble the roads. The world would be clean of them, healed of their presence, and Middle-earth would be poorer for it, in a way. Because every creature, even the twisted and cursed ones, had a story worth remembering. Every life, even a simple one, had meaning. The trolls had been weapons. They had been servants of evil. They had caused suffering and death across the ages. But they had also been alive. They had thought in their simple way. They had felt even if they did not always understand what they were feeling. They had endured when so many others had fallen, and in the echoes they left behind, in the stone statues and the empty caves and the stories told around fires, they would be remembered. Not fondly, perhaps, not kindly, but remembered nonetheless. And for creatures who had never been meant to matter, who had been created as tools and treated as monsters, being remembered was perhaps the only immortality they would ever know. The fourth age turned like a great wheel carrying Middle-earth toward new destinies, and the trolls faded into legend, into memory, into stone. But not quite yet. Not quite yet. A few still walked, a few still endured, and as long as even one remained, the story was not over. The story was never truly over. And so we come to the ending, dear adventurers. Every tale must end, even those that span ages. Every journey must reach its destination, even if that destination is not what we hoped for. Let us follow Grond one last time to see where his path finally leads. The journey north took months. Grond traveled only by night, as he always had, hiding during the day in whatever cave or crevice he could find. The world grew colder as he climbed latitude by latitude. The trees grew sparse, then disappeared entirely. The ground became frozen hard as iron covered in snow that never melted. He passed through lands that had no names, at least none that he knew. Mountains that touched the sky, valleys where the wind howled like a living thing, plains of ice that stretched to the horizon, empty and white and endless. It was beautiful in a stark, terrible way, the kind of beauty that had no room for life, no mercy for weakness. The kind of beauty that would kill you if you were not strong enough to endure it. But Grond was strong. He had always been strong, and the cold meant nothing to his stone-like flesh. He walked on. Oh, he found the first sign of other trolls 3 months into his journey. Footprints in the snow, massive and unmistakable. They were old, perhaps weeks old, but they were there. Proof that he was not alone, that others had come this way before him. Grond followed the tracks. They led him east, then north again, through a mountain pass so high and cold that even the sky seemed frozen. And on the other side of that pass, in a valley sheltered from the worst of the wind, he found them, trolls, perhaps 24 of them, gathered in a loose community around a series of ice caves. They were snow trolls mostly, pale as the landscape around them, but there were a few cave trolls too, and even 1 or 2 hill trolls who had somehow survived the long journey north. They watched Grond approach with wary eyes. Trolls were not naturally social creatures. Even this gathering was unusual, born of necessity rather than desire. The largest of the snow trolls stepped forward. She was ancient like Grond, with skin that had taken on the translucent quality of old ice. "You are far from your mountains," she said. Her voice was like wind over glaciers. "My mountains have no place for me," Grond replied simply. The snow troll nodded, understanding. "Few places do any more. That is why we gather here, the last refuge, the final home." "How many?" Grond asked. 24 here. Perhaps 100 more scattered across the north. That is all that remain of our kind." She paused. "I am called Scuddy. I remember Angband. I remember the wars. I remember when there were thousands of us. I am Grond. I also remember." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 ancient creatures sharing the weight of ages. Then Scuddy gestured toward the caves. "There is room. There is food, though it is scarce. You may stay if you wish, or you may continue north. Some do, seeking something. Though what, they never say." Grond looked at the gathered trolls. They were the last of their kind, refugees from a world that had moved on without them. They had survived the Dark Lord, survived the wars, survived the long years of persecution and hiding. And now they were here, in the coldest, most remote place they could find, waiting. Always waiting. "I will stay," Grond said, "for a time." Life in the Ice Valley was simple, simpler even than life in the mountains had been. There were no travelers to rob, no sheep to hunt. Food was scarce, seals that ventured too far from the sea, polar bears, the occasional caribou. The trolls hunted in small groups, working together out of necessity rather than friendship. But there was also a kind of peace here that Grond had never known. No dark lords to serve, no wars to fight, no purpose beyond simple survival. It was what he had always wanted, in the moments when he had allowed himself to want anything. And yet, it was not enough. It was never enough. He spoke with Scotty often, during the long nights when the aurora danced overhead. She was the oldest troll he had ever met, older even than himself. She had been one of the first created, had fought in battles whose names were lost to history. "Do you regret it?" Grond asked her one night. "All of it, the wars, the service, the long years?" Scotty was quiet for a long time. "Regret requires choice," she said finally. We had no choice. We were made for darkness. We served because we were made to serve. How can I regret something I could not change? But we had some choice, Grand insisted. We could have resisted more. We could have fought against our nature. Could we? Truly? Skadi turned to look at him, her eyes ancient and sad. We tried. Some of us tried. They all died, Grand. Every single troll who seriously resisted the Dark Lord's call. The pain was too much. The compulsion too strong. We were slaves, Grand. Slaves to our own nature. And you cannot blame a slave for their slavery. Then what were we? Grand asked. If we had no choice, if we were just tools, just weapons, then what were we? Were we even alive? We are alive now, Skadi said softly. Now, in this moment, free of masters, free of wars, free to simply exist. That is more than most of our kind ever had. It is enough. It has to be enough. But Grand was not sure it was enough. Not sure it would ever be enough. The years passed in the Ice Valley. Trolls came and went. Some stayed seeking community and safety. Others moved on after a time, restless, searching for something they could not name. A few died, claimed by accidents or simple exhaustion, their bodies left to freeze in the eternal cold. Grand stayed. He did not know where else to go, and there was a kind of comfort in being among his own kind, even if trolls were not naturally sociable. They understood each other. They shared memories of the old days. They did not judge, did not question, did not expect anything beyond simple coexistence. But he felt himself changing, growing slower, thinking less. His memories were fading, becoming hazy, like dreams half remembered upon waking. Sometimes he would forget why he had come here. Sometimes he would forget the names of trolls he had known for years. Sometimes he would simply sit, staring at nothing, lost in a fog that had no name. "You are becoming stone," Skadi told him one day. "Not from sunlight, from age, from weariness, from the simple weight of existing for so long." "Is that what happened to you?" Grand asked. Her movements had become even slower than his, her words even more sparse. "Yes, it happens to all of us eventually. We are made from stone, and to stone we return." She paused. "It is not painful. It is more like fading, like a candle burning down to nothing. One day we will simply stop. Stop moving, stop thinking, stop being, and we will be stone again, just stone." "Is that death?" Grand asked. "I do not know. Perhaps, or perhaps it is just another form of existence. Stone exists after all. Mountains endure. Perhaps we will endure too in our way." The end, when it came, was not dramatic. There was no battle, no tragedy, no final words of wisdom. It was simply an ending. Grand woke one morning, or what passed for morning in the long twilight of the polar winter. He felt heavy, so heavy, as if his bones had truly turned to stone, as if the earth was pulling him down, calling him home. He tried to stand, but found he could not. His legs would not obey, his arms lay at his sides, immovable. Only his eyes still worked, and his mind, though it moved slowly, like cold honey. Skadi came and sat beside him. She was nearly immobile herself now, moving with such slowness that it seemed she might stop at any moment. "It is time," she said softly. "I know," Grand replied, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Are you afraid?" Grand thought about it, tried to feel for fear in what remained of his emotions, but there was nothing. No fear, no sadness, just a great overwhelming tiredness, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from having endured for so long. "No," he said, "not afraid, just tired." "Yes," Scotty agreed, "so tired." They sat together as the long night deepened. The aurora blazed overhead, painting the sky in colors that even troll eyes could appreciate, green and gold and purple, dancing and shimmering like the ghosts of all the ages. Gron thought about his life. All the centuries, all the battles, all the masters and wars and endless servitude, all the brief moments of freedom in between, all the questions he had never found answers to. Had it been worth it? Had his existence mattered? Had he been more than just a weapon, more than just a monster? He did not know. But he had been alive. He had existed. He had endured. And perhaps that was answer enough. His thoughts grew slower, fuzzier. The aurora began to fade, though whether it was truly fading or his eyes were simply failing, he could not tell. The cold which had never bothered him seemed to deepen, not painful, just absolute, final. He thought of Barg, asking his eternal question. "Are we alive?" Yes, Gron thought. We were alive. We were. And then, gently, peacefully, like a stone settling into earth after a long fall, Gron stopped. His heart, if trolls truly had hearts, beat one final time and was still. His mind, simple as it had always been, faded into silence. His body became what it had always been meant to be. Stone. Just stone. Scuddy sat beside him for a long time. Days, perhaps, or weeks. Time meant nothing to her anymore. She was so close to stone herself that the difference between life and death was barely perceptible. Other trolls passed by. They looked at Gron's still form. They understood. They said nothing, because there was nothing to say. They simply moved on, continuing their own slow journeys toward whatever ending awaited them. Eventually, Skadi moved away. Or perhaps she did not move, but simply became part of the landscape, another stone among stones. It was impossible to tell. The ice valley stood silent and cold. A few trolls still moved through it, the very last of their kind. But they were fading too, one by one, returning to the stone from which they had been made. The age of trolls was ending, not with a battle, not with a final stand against the sun, just with a quiet fading, a gentle return to the earth, a stone settling into its final rest. And somewhere in the wild lands, in the high mountains and deep caves and frozen wastes, other trolls were doing the same, lying down to rest, stopping, becoming stone once more, the last of their kind, the end of an age, but not forgotten, never forgotten, because they had lived, they had existed. They had endured through everything the world could throw at them, and their story, terrible and sad as it was, deserved to be told, deserved to be remembered, for even monsters have tales worth hearing, even weapons have histories worth preserving, and even stones, silent and still, can speak to those who know how to listen. In the ice valley, Gron's stone form stood as a monument, not to evil, or darkness, or war, but to endurance, to survival, to the simple, stubborn fact of existence. He had been made as a weapon, but he had died free, and that, perhaps was the only victory that truly mattered. And so, dear adventurers, our tale comes to its end. The fire has burned low, the night has grown deep, and it is time for us to part ways, at least until the next story calls us together. You have journeyed with me tonight through ages of Middle Earth. You have walked with creatures who were made for darkness but yearned, in their simple way, for light. You have witnessed wars that shook the foundations of the world. You have seen empires rise and fall, and you have watched as the trolls, those ancient cursed beings, endured through it all. It was not a happy tale, not entirely. How could it be? The trolls were created for evil purposes, shaped by dark lords to serve as weapons and monsters. They caused suffering and death across the ages. They were feared, and rightly so, but they were also victims. Created without choice, cursed from their first breath, bound to serve masters they did not choose. They were simple creatures thrust into a complex world, trying to make sense of an existence they never asked for. And yet, they endured. Through the fall of Morgoth and the fall of Sauron, through ages of war and ages of peace, through persecution and hiding and endless, endless waiting, they survived. When so many others fell, they found moments of companionship in the darkness. They asked questions that had no answers. They wondered about their place in the world. "Are we alive?" Bug asked so long ago. And the answer, I think, is yes. They were alive. In their own way, by their own measure, they lived. They were more than just moving stones, more than just weapons. They were beings with thoughts and memories and, in their simple way, feelings. Tom, Bert, and William arguing about cooking methods in their forest clearing, finding something like friendship in their centuries together, frozen forever in stone, but remembered. Grond, the Ancient One, who survived everything the world threw at him, who served two dark lords and lived to tell the tale, who finally found peace in the frozen north, returning to the stone from which he was made. Skadi, the Ice Queen, who chose solitude and found a different kind of freedom in the eternal cold. And all the others, the countless trolls whose names we never learned, who lived and fought and died across the ages, each one a story, each one a life. However cursed, the trolls are gone now, or nearly so. Perhaps a few still linger in the deepest, darkest places. Perhaps somewhere in the wild lands a stone form still stands, waiting for a night that will never come. But their age has passed. The world has moved on, and yet they deserve to be remembered. Not glorified, certainly, not excused for the harm they caused, but remembered as what they truly were. Creatures caught between darkness and light, between servitude and freedom, between stone and life. They teach us something, I think. They teach us that even those who seem like monsters have stories. That even those created for evil can question their nature. That even the cursed can seek meaning in their existence. They teach us about endurance, about surviving when survival seems impossible, about finding small moments of peace in a world full of war, about asking questions even when no answers come. And they teach us, perhaps most importantly, that freedom is precious, even limited freedom, even freedom that comes with uncertainty and fear. Because the trolls, in their brief moments of being masterless, being purposeless, being simply themselves, found something they had never known under the Dark Lord's rule. They found the right to choose, even if that choice was only where to hide and what to hunt and whether to endure another day. So let us bid farewell to the trolls of Middle-earth. Let us remember them not as simple monsters, but as complex creatures who did their best with the terrible fate they were given. Let us honor their endurance, their survival, their stubborn refusal to simply give up and fade away, and let us learn from their tale that every being has worth, that every story deserves to be heard, that even in darkness there can be moments of light. The fire is ash now, dear adventurers. The night is old, and you have stayed with me through this long tale, through all its darkness and its sadness and its strange, bittersweet hope. I thank you for listening. I thank you for caring about creatures who most would dismiss as simple monsters. I thank you for seeing the truth beneath the stone. Now, it is time for rest, time for sleep, time to let the story settle in your hearts and minds, to see what wisdom it might bring in dreams. May your sleep be peaceful, may your dreams be kind, and may you remember when you wake that every creature has a story worth telling if only we have the patience to listen. Until we meet again around the fire, dear adventurers, until the next tale calls us together, until the next journey begins. Sleep well, sleep safe, and remember the trolls who endured through ages, who survived when survival seemed impossible, who found meaning in a meaningless existence. They were made from stone. They returned to stone. But in between, they lived. And that, dear friends, is all any of us can hope for. Good night.